that we are now recording, and I have muted everyone. At the end of the slides, we will have an opportunity for some questions and answers. So just ask everybody, if you want to go ahead and jot down a question or something in the chat, then my coworker Elijah Griles can help capture that, and that can help expedite the Q&A process at the end. Again, as I said before we started recording, my name is Tony Banks. I'm with the Virginia Foundation for Agriculture Innovation and Rural Sustainability. And we are going to discuss USDA Agricultural Marketing Services latest grant for meat and poultry processors, the Local Meat Capacity Grant Program. So first, for those folks that may not be aware, the Virginia Foundation for Ag Innovation and Rural Sustainability, also known as Virginia FAIRS, sometimes you'll hear us just say FAIRS. We are a foundation that was established about 20 years ago, and we work with different agricultural groups, farmers, rural businesses, in areas of cooperative development, business development. We also have an established farm relief fund. And our latest edition is what we refer to as the Bullpen. It is an ag and forestry innovation business pitch challenge competition. And in fact, last year was the first year we conducted that. And a meat processor here in Virginia actually won the Bullpen competition last year. But without much further ado, let's get started. We'll dive into the Local Meat Capacity Grant Program. Again, it is a new program under the Agricultural Marketing Service. It is a nationally competitive federal grant program. There is up to $75 million that are available to build capacity within the meat and poultry supply chain, primarily with processors that have smaller scale projects. And again, it's to increase processing availability for local and regional livestock producers. Now, this is also going to include catfish of the Ciliiformes species, which would generally mean domestic, or the catfish native to the United States, as opposed to other countries. The $75 million, AMS has also set out 10% as a carve out for rendering meat and poultry rendering businesses to help them expand their rendering capacity. That's certainly on the red meat side, that has become an increasing challenge here over the past few years as we've seen some changes in that sector. So local meat capacity, or the local MCAP grant project types, there's what, and USDA has in their notice has even admitted this, basically what the MCAP grant program does is it takes a modified version of the previous meat and poultry expansion processing grant and the meat and poultry inspection readiness grant. It takes this program serves as a variation. So what we really have here in MCAP are two variations of other programs that are geared to small, medium-sized operations. And so we have the Processing Expansion Grant Project, which funds from $100,000 up to $5 million to increase processing or rendering capacity. There is a 50% match required unless the applicant qualifies for a reduced match. And the reduced match, the applicant would need to fall in one of the groups listed there below: socially disadvantaged, limited resource, small, beginning, or veteran farmer, or a Small Business Administration define small disadvantaged veteran or women-owned non-farm business. These funding requests for the processing expansion, it is for making improvements, rearranging, doing, we'll just say maybe some light construction within the existing building or structure. And the idea is that any construction that occurs is necessary to accommodate new or upgraded equipment or processes. It can also be used to purchase equipment that's specialized equipment that's related to meat and poultry processing or rendering. Um, and with the poultry expansion project, it can also be used to pay for labor. If you have let's say you have you're adding a species to your product line and you need to make modifications to your HACCP plan if you're an existing processor, or perhaps you're custom exempt and you want to come under inspection, then you're going to need your sanitation plans and your HACCP plan. So you can hire a consultant with this grant to help you develop those plans. If you need to uh, send your employees to a school to train them on a specific new piece of equipment or something of that nature, then those are some other eligible expenses under the poultry processing expansion project. Again, these projects may last up to 36 months. And in theory, you could use up to 10% of the indirect costs that you could use that as a match. And we'll talk about match later in the presentation. Expansion, here's some examples. Again, expand the capacity to increase volume, process additional species, add a new value-added product type, upgrade processing equipment, increase packaging and label, improve slaughter infrastructure, which could include installing new pens or new wastewater systems and improvements. But you cannot break new ground or construct new facilities with this grant. Grant funds cannot be used to expand the foundation or any of the structure's outer skins, the exterior walls or the load-bearing walls. Again, it's minor construction necessary to accommodate equipment and handling changes within the facility. The second type of project is a simplified equipment-only project, and it's for smaller grants between $10,000 and $250,000. It's only for equipment purchases for meat, poultry processing or rendering, catfish too. And there's zero match required. The projects can last up to 24 months. And here again, it's only for specialized equipment that's going to allow the applicant to expand capacity. Again, can only be used to purchase equipment. So let's talk a little bit about grant applicant eligibility. So eligible applicants can include an individual, so a sole proprietor, or other business entities engaged in meat, poultry, catfish processing or rendering of carcasses and byproducts, as well as tribes, tribal entities, other for-profit entities, state and local government entities. Eligible entities must be existing operations and must process or plan to process one or more species under either the Federal Meat Inspection Act or Poultry Product Inspection Act. In other words, you already have a federal grant of inspection, or you're being inspected here in Virginia. That would be by the state under the Virginia Department of Agriculture and Consumer Services. And that would be for amenable species. And if you're doing non-amenable species and you're already under voluntary inspection, you would also be eligible. If there is an existing operation or an existing operation can include someone or an entity that's restarting an existing facility. So you're reopening a plant with a new owner, or you're restarting a temporarily closed business. The applicants that are nationally dominant in beef, pork, chicken, or turkey processing are ineligible. And what that means, if the applicant is, um, you know, is the has the fourth largest share of the market for any of the species, or greater, fourth largest market share or greater, then they would be ineligible. Um, Under the local MCAP, processors who do further processing activities, they that those activities must be conducted primarily for further processing of the products of slaughter or primary processing from their own facility, or further processing that contributes to value-added product opportunities for small local livestock producers. So this, if you're, if you're bringing in, box beef or hog bellies or something, and you're making hams, you're making deli meats or something, and you did not actually slaughter or do the primary processing on that product, then you may not be eligible. Now, if you're operating a facility where maybe you're not doing the slaughter, but maybe a farmer has the carcass or has the animal slaughtered and brings the carcass to you for processing, then you may be eligible, because in theory, you could be contributing to the value-added product opportunity for that farmer. Any of the entities that have previously received meat and poultry inspection readiness grant programs, you can apply for this program, but you've got to successfully complete and close out your MPIRG grant before being awarded MCAP. And if you are an MPIRG recipient, then you can't use this program to double dip for expenses that you have already been provided grant funds for. Entities that are not eligible: meat and poultry processing entities that are custom exempt or otherwise uninspected with no plans to operate under federal or state equivalent inspection going forward. So if you're custom exempt and you want to remain custom exempt, you would not be eligible. Poultry and meat and poultry processing entities that are exclusively for non-commercial use are ineligible. Applicants that hold a market share greater than or equal to the entity that holds the fourth largest share of that market for any of the following species: beef, pork, chicken, and turkey, are ineligible. And then there's a limit as to how many applications an entity can participate in, and that's 75% there of common ownership. And this is going to be required. Evidence of critical infrastructure is required from all applicants, whether it's simplified or the processing expansion project type. At the time of application, the applicant must be able to demonstrate and certify that the resources and infrastructure necessary to complete the project, including land, structures, and other necessary resources, are in place and in working condition at the time of the application submission. And there's a template that's on the website that it's highly recommended that you use that template to certify that the applicant does in fact have critical infrastructure and resources in place. So, applicable regulations. Here's a list of various of the main regulations that grantees are expected to participate in are, naturally the Federal Meat and Poultry Inspection Act, Poultry Products Inspection Act, others, other regulations related to meat and poultry processing, as well as primary drinking water regulations, NEPA, before before you be awarded the grant. AMS will conduct an environmental survey or ask you to conduct an environmental survey. And if they find that there's a need, you may have to go through with a full-blown NEPA assessment in order to be eligible to receive the funding. Other laws, local, state, tribal laws also are going to, they're going to be there too, that you have to comply with. So it's new with some of these programs that USDA is rolling out now for smaller projects, is the Build America, Buy America Act, or BABA. That requires all iron, steel, manufactured products and construction materials used in federally funded projects must be produced in the United States. And up until last year, USDA had a waiver for the majority of their projects. That waiver expired. And now USDA is operating with a very limited waiver, which may affect some of the projects that that you may be proposing. There is a need for clarification that we need to get from USDA, and that is there's a discrepancy between BABA's definition for non-federal entities, and there's the entities that are subject to the law, versus local MCAP's eligible participants. And so I think, once USDA clarifies who is covered for this MCAP grant under BABA, that would certainly make acquiring some of these grant items, the materials for construction as well as the equipment, it would certainly make it easier for the applicants. As I said, USDA currently has a limited set of waivers for these for the grants regarding the domestic content procurement. There's three basic exceptions for the waiver. There's public interest. In that case, if we're talking about the metals and the construction materials, and there is an allowance for a 5% de minimis. So you could have some construction materials that are sourced from offshore, as long as they don't exceed that 5% de minimis. For small grants, that would be grants that would be less than $250,000. They may be exempt from BABA. Then there's the minor components, and this could be for equipment that may be made with both U.S. and foreign sourced steel and manufacturing products. Non-availability, there may be a piece of equipment that you need in your facility that there is no U.S. manufacturer. That's all the manufacturers for that type of equipment are overseas. So that would certainly be considered for a waiver. Unreasonable cost. This relates to the availability of the materials and whether or not the cost, how much those materials cost. And I believe the waiver limit is that the applicant would have to show that the costs of the materials exceed 25% of what they could purchase those same materials and or equipment for offshore. So there's, again, I think we really need to see some clarification from USDA and AMS on this program. Um, they haven't made that information available yet, or the clarification. But there are two websites that you see at the bottom of the slide that go into uh, some greater depth that talks about, USDA's Buy America waiver, and then it talks about the small grants minimum components waiver that's agency wide. So there's some information there that you can refer to. But I would say right now, go ahead, and with that in mind, I would look at USDA or U.S. sourced components and equipment, um, and begin heading down that path and factor that into your budgets. The way I understand it, USDA is not going to consider the waivers or anything like that until after someone has received a grant award. So as part of the, once there's a grant agreement in place, um, then you would be in a position where if you need to negotiate a waiver, uh, you would need to do that with AMS at that time. And there is a waiver procedure, which is outlined on the process down below. But I would, if you're working on your work plan and you're trying to figure out how much it might take, how much time it may take to go through this waiver process, you might want to factor in maybe 2-3 months extra, um, or the amount of time it may take to go through the waiver process. Because for some of the larger projects, thinking under the process expansion where we're talking about larger sums of money, there is there is a process where the USDA will solicit public comment on specific waivers, and these will all be done case by case. So just something to keep in mind. So how to apply? Um, Applications need to be submitted online at grants.gov before midnight, July 19th, 2023. Incomplete and late applications will not be accepted. You can go to the website, USDA or AMSUSDA.gov at Services Grants Local MCAP, and you can find complete details. They'll have the request for applications, the RFA, the templates for the applications themselves, the various letters that are required. There's frequently asked questions. At some point in the next couple of weeks, USDA will likely host their own MCAP webinar. And there's also information about special conditions that apply only to this program. And please take a look at the special conditions, because sometimes USDA will put out, they'll have variances with respect to items. Maybe it's types of eligible equipment or the types of eligible uh, construction or different things like that that are unique to this program that um, that are going to be different than other programs you may be familiar with. Um, Processing expansion project applicants. You must use the processing expansion project narrative template that's provided on the website. Don't write it by hand. Don't retype it in Word. Use that template, and that template is specific to the processing expansion project. That template, for example, is 11 pages, and there's a 15-page limit. So the most, when you're finished using 11-point font, the most that template can be when you're finished with it is 26 pages. the simplified equipment only applicants, you need to use the simplified equipment only project narrative template. That's a lot shorter. It's 5 pages. So there's going to be less requirements for documentation with that. Applicants, regardless of the project type, you must demonstrate that the request will increase local meat, poultry processing or rendering capacity and volumes, or increase opportunities for livestock, poultry, or catfish farmers to access local processing. And again, I said, as I mentioned, all applications must be submitted online through grants.gov. Okay, to do that, if you're not already registered in grants.gov, you first need to go register with sam.gov, which is a system award management system that the federal government uses. And then after you've registered with SAM, then you will need to register with grants.gov in order to submit your application. This registration process for those two websites, it could take a week. But I would play it on the safe side and plan for it to take up to 6 or 7 weeks, which if you're interested, if you're interested in pursuing one of these grants after this afternoon, then I would recommend the first thing you do is begin registration with SAM and then grants.gov. So why do we have to register with SAM? It's to certify that the applicant is a legitimate and legal entity. It's to certify that the applicant is eligible to receive federal monies. Example, you haven't been, the applicant hasn't been disbarred, or doesn't isn't looking at owing the federal government back taxes or penalties or anything like that. That's the type of information they'll look for once you register. And it's the SAM information, your unique entity identifier and cage code that are assigned to you in sam.gov are necessary for you to register with grants.gov. Most important, sam.gov registration is free. When you go to that, here's a screenshot of the home page. There are a number of companies, individuals on the internet who will gladly take $400, $500, $600 from you, collect the same information from you that you will need to submit in SAM, and they'll be happy to take your money to do the same thing for you. But that does give them access to all of your information. It also gives them control to your SAM account information once you're registered. So I would definitely try to work on that yourself. It's not that difficult. It does take some time. All right. So once you've got your SAMS.gov, then the go register with grants.gov. Again, it's required increasingly more and more. We're seeing this with USDA applications are using grants.gov. It's to speed up the process or digitize the process. Applicants afterwards, you can also use that system to track your application and look for other grant opportunities within USDA or other federal agencies. Grants.gov registration is free. So your application package, and you see here in the table all of the different parts that are required, these SF424s, that application, the budget summary, the project abstract summary, that is information that you literally type in on the screen when you're in grants.gov. The project narrative, depending on which project type that you're applying for, you would upload that document onto grants.gov. Letters of support from producers or other entities that could benefit, or the communities. Those letters aren't required, but they're encouraged. and I would strongly encourage that you include some of those letters, to show producer and community support for your project. Evidence of critical infrastructure, you're going to have to upload that as well. That is required. If you have a processing expansion project, you will need to document your match verification. There's a template for that on the website, and it's basically where you list out either how much cash you will be making available uh, as a match throughout the project period, or the amount of in-kind, whether that's salaries of staff that are devoted to working on the expansion, whatever time salary rate for those individuals that would be assigned to the project, that could serve as in-kind, or that could serve as your in-kind match, as well as a portion of the indirect costs if that's something that you need to do. Equipment documentation, um, again, that's going to be subject to the budget under the processing expansion uh, with respect to what types of equipment and the costs and everything. For the simplified equipment only, it is required, and that's basically describing what the equipment is, what it's going to do, how it's going to help you increase capacity or throughput there on the processing line, and basically this is the equipment and this is why we need it. Application narrative, again, use the templates that are provided for the processing expansion. 11-point font, no more than 15 pages, which I believe I said it earlier, the blank template is 11 pages, so you don't want that document to exceed 26 pages. There's going to be applicant information, including a description of the current business, operations, capacity, types of inspection, your permit numbers for inspection, those sort of things. Then the templates get into the grant project information, and this is the information that you're going to be reviewed on by a panel of independent reviewers, and they'll be scoring your application. So it's going to, a background information about your operation and the market condition and the opportunities there in areas. What are the proposed project activities? Who are the the project beneficiaries? Is it the local farmers? Are you is it a co-op? Is it your co-op's members who are going to be benefiting? Are there consumers that are in your area that are having difficulty sourcing local meat and poultry? So these are all things that you want to include. You also want to list out the project objectives. Are we just are we adding new refrigeration and new racks to increase storage capacity? Is that the bottleneck in the system that if alleviated, could help you process more meat? So you'll need to state out those objectives, and then in the work plan for each objective, you want to say, you want to list the objective. You want to list basically who, what, when, and where. How. Here's the objective. Now, how are we going to accomplish it? Who's going to do it? And what are the time periods for having this done? And that's all spelled out in a chart there, a form that you can follow. Key staff. So for the project, there's going to, somebody's got to be in charge. Somebody's got to somebody is going to be making sure that the equipment goes in the right place. So you want to list all of the key staff people that are going to be involved with your project. And let's say as for some construction, if you have to hire a contractor, then you want to list the principal of that contracting firm. So you'll want name, their titles. In the next column, you'll want to briefly state what their specific role is to that project. And then in the third column, you'll want to list their relevant experience as to why they're qualified to conduct those activities. And so then there's a place where you basically talk about a program plan or a project management plan. And that's basically just a paragraph description of basically the same information that's in the table. Project outcomes, this is where they're going to want to know, you know, as a result of this project, you know, how many additional head or birds, do you estimate will be processed annually? How much cold storage capacity will be increased. You want to specify that in pounds or percent. Are there new value added or products that are being created as a result of this grant? Are there new processing technologies? Maybe you're going from some people or some facilities may be going from craft paper to all vacuum sealed, so that for that facility that would be a new processing technology. What are the number of jobs that are created or maintained now? And for these different projects, you may not necessarily have it may not be applicable. So if there's a line item that's not applicable, then you just check not applicable. But if you don't check not applicable, there needs to be an estimate for that number. And then we move on to the budget information. There'll be a summary table where you list all the expenses for the various categories. And then there's a budget narrative where you detail each budget category, personnel, travel, fringe benefits, construction, equipment, indirect, all these different categories. And for each one of those, you're also going to be required to provide a narrative discussion, documenting why the expenses are what they are, how you arrived at the expenses. You want to make sure that you show rates. Hey, if you're talking about personnel and you put $50,000 a year down for Tony, that's not going to cut it. They're going to want to know how many hours and what the hourly rate is. Otherwise, you're going to lose points when it comes under the review. For Appendix A, that is there's information there where you would document why you as an applicant would qualify for a reduction in match from 50% down to 25% match. Simplified equipment is basically the same. It's a little bit shorter. And background information, activities, beneficiaries, work plan, all this stuff. Budget information is actually shorter. Again, you're only going to have the one budget category, and that's going to be equipment. Now, if you go, when you get a chance, if you go to the request for applications on page 22, yes, I'm jumping ahead. These are when they talk about being scored for the narrative under the grant project information and the budget information. These are the items that each application is going to be reviewed for. And there's complete scoring details on page 22 of the RFA on the local MCAP webpage. And you can pull those up and you can see how what the maximum number of scores are for each section. Project expenses. I don't believe I've mentioned this earlier, but the grant funds are dispersed to grantees on a reimbursement basis for incurred budgeted expenses. So if you've been awarded and you get into the grant and and suddenly you decide you need a new saw. You didn't have the saw in the budget. You go ahead and you buy the saw, and then you submit the bill to USDA. They may not accept your bill for the saw. If you do need to make a variation or an adjustment in your budget, I would definitely contact USDA ahead of time, get that pre-approved, so that if you do need to make that saw purchase and not spend money on some other item, then you know, then you and USDA can discuss that ahead of time um, and hopefully work that out. All equipment purchases, they must be necessary for the technical activities. They must meet the legislative purpose of the program and the objectives of the agreement. And the grant agreement is a contract that the applicants will enter into as a condition of receiving the grant. And it basically tells you how you're going to conduct under the terms of which you're going to conduct the project and get reimbursed. So again, equipment is subject to the acquisition, use, management, and disposition requirements under the federal government. And what this means is that if, let's say you have a $50,000 saw, and the useful life, I'm just making this up, the useful life of that saw is 10 years, then USDA may be required to monitor and account for the use of that saw or its disposition for that 10 years, even though the grant project may have, the grant project period itself may have ended either in year 2 or year 3, and it's up to 8 years out, and USDA may still be contacting the grantee once a year or every other year to say, hey, do you still have that saw? Is it still in place? Once it's met its useful life, or the value of the saw or that any equipment has dropped below $5,000, then you're free to do with it as you will. But until that time, if you have equipment that they paid for, you will need to be in contact with USDA if you need to sell the equipment, or maybe it burns up. Who knows? You do need to stay in touch with USDA regarding the disposition of that equipment. So unallowable expense for simplified equipment only projects, any improvement, rearrangement, or alterations to the existing building. That just means they're not going to pay for it. They're only going to pay for equipment under the simplified equipment only. Unallowable expenses for all the project types would be structural changes to the existing building facility that result in an increase in square footage or require a change to the floor, foundation, exterior load-bearing walls. New construction is ineligible. Purchases for general purpose equipment, motor vehicles, furniture, laptops, printers, copiers, or lease to own agreements. If you have a closed-in lease, or you're just a simple rent arrangement, those are usually allowable. But any type of agreement where the lease payments that you've made apply to the purchase price would be ineligible. Compensation for injuries or damage to the property arising from the project activities are unallowable, and purchasing of land, buildings, and facilities is unallowable. So the NCAP summary here, the grant details, you can see the website there again, or you can just go on your go to your web browser and type USDA local space MCAP, and it should pop right up. Again, applicants will need to register with sam.gov and grants.gov. Remember, sam.gov registration is free. USDA is expected to host a local MCAP webinar in the next couple of weeks. And as a reminder, the applications are due by 11:59 p.m. Eastern Time, July 19th, 2023. And this introductory webinar and a copy of the slide deck will be made available to participants and online at www.vafairs.com. As some of you may or may not know, one of the things that Virginia Fairs does is provide technical grant assistance. And our process for doing that is that we, as staff, would meet with the prospective applicant, discuss the business. We'd provide you with a questionnaire to give us more information about your operation, and most of this is information we would be using in the grant application. Then once we have a contract signed and we've received a down payment, then we would work with you to write the application and the accompanying documentation and provide support through submission, award, and reimbursement. The fee for this service, we do charge a 1% fee that's of the grant amount requested. So if if you're requesting $100,000 grant, then our fee would be $1,000. If it's a $250,000 grant, then it'd be $2,500. Now we often we get more requests than we can handle due to a limitation on our resources and staff. So if you're interested in some help, but maybe feel like you don't need us to help you write it, we're certainly glad to look over the application before you turn it in and offer any suggestions, and we'll be happy to do that for free. But with that, here's my contact information and FAIR's general contact information. And let me see here. Oops. Getting ready to unmute everyone. There we go. So we've got about 15 minutes or so. If anyone has any questions, we'll be happy to try to answer them.
Hey, Tony, Sam Krickenberger, how you doing today?
Pretty good. Glad
hey,
you
I missed the upper threshold on that your local MCAP grant. You said it was 10,000 up to how much again?
For the simplified equipment only, it's 10,000 up to $250,000. The processing expansion, which can have some indoor construction, that would be 100,000 up to 5 million. And that the processing expansion is 36 months. The simplified equipment only is 24 months.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Can you all hear me?
Yes.
Oh, I had a question regarding the grant going up to 5 million regarding the sourcing of your manufactured materials, and it looked like in our case we're looking at doing like a ready-to-eat product for a universal smokehouse. In the case of what we currently have, we would use like a German manufactured product. Would that be something that would be prohibited unless, of course, we were to fall under some of those waivers?
Yes, you would need to you would need to consult with USDA for the waiver.
Okay, and as far as I understand, for the waiver, unavailability is one of them, and then unreasonable costs compared with what else is on the market. And then I can't remember the other one, but that was the one that I wasn't quite the de minimis. If you could get further into that.
Oh, I wish I could. I feel like I'd be going down a rabbit hole.
Yeah,
It's
it's kind of vague terminology, and that's why I was curious of what exactly that means.
yeah, it's as I understand it, with some of the certifications they want on like construction materials, whether it's steel, it could be aluminum, or it could be composites, or even drywall. You know, if it's the 5% de minimis, then they would allow up to 5% of the content of that steel to be from offshore. Um, if it's a piece of equipment, then they would, you know, allow some minor components that are, you know, up to 5%.
I see.
If your project is, as I understand it, if the project is less than $250,000, that would qualify as a small grant project, and and the waiver as well. Now, for the unreasonable cost and the availability, um, you know, those are two items that I believe do have to go through the public participation process when requesting a waiver.
Okay, that's good to know.
But that's, you know, certainly my biggest questions right now, you know, looking at some of these potential projects, are the waiver issues with the Build America, Buy America, and, you know, hopefully USDA can provide some clear guidance on that.
Sounds good. Sounds like it might be a. I'm always just curious, from your experience or from what you know, is there a significant difficulty in engaging in like a indoor construction project like that, and finding vendors that actually source everything from the U.S.? I mean, I don't know how typical that is.
Uh, I don't I don't know. You know, USDA with under another service branch, the rural development. I know they have been enforcing the Build America, Buy America requirements on you know, rural utility projects, and, you know, some of those are going to, you know, let's say it's a public water system or a hospital, or, you know, department, or, I mean, fire station or something like that. So, you know, those are types of projects they may already be enforcing those on. So they may be able to help provide sources for those types of materials.
Okay, thank you.
But that's definitely a question that USDA needs to answer. Uh, let's see. Let's scroll up. Let's see. I have one question here. If an expansion project includes several pieces of equipment, would the grant work towards the entire project or just one of the pieces of equipment? Um, you know, I would say that as long as the applicant is able to document that they meet the evidence of critical infrastructure and resources, if you want, you know, if you're just applying for a grant to purchase one or two pieces of equipment with the idea that you're going to, that the applicant would purchase any additional equipment outside the grant, um, I do not believe that would be an issue. All right. Do we have any other questions? Or has anyone looked at the website yet to see the resources and materials and um, again, if you look at the RFA that's on the website and you go through and follow it, you it pretty much walks you through the system. Again, the biggest area that you want to pay attention to in the RFA is the application review information starting on page 22. So, in your narrative, if you write something like, well, we want to put in this saw and vacuum sealer, and so we can process more meat. Okay, you're going to need to say a whole lot more than that, and you want to talk about why you need the saw. You want to get into throughput. Maybe worker safety is an issue. Maybe you believe, as an industry standard, or from some of the competitors that you may or may not know, maybe they experience a 10% premium on the retail product if the cut is vacuum sealed as opposed to wrapped in craft paper or in a styrofoam tray with shrink wrap. So that's the type of stuff they want you to tell a story. They want to see that you thought through the process of why you need the equipment or why you need to do this internal construction, and what the benefit is going to be both to the applicant as well as any producers that may or may not use the facility, or employees, or even consumers. And if you go through on page 22, starting there, that will give you a good idea of the detail that they want. And page 22 is where the criteria for processing expansion projects begins, and then as that's completed, on page 24, then it starts right up with a much shorter version for the simplified equipment only grants, where you're basically being reviewed for alignment and intent and market impact and opportunities. And if don't sweat it if you don't think you're going to get the full score on each item. It's a trade-off when you start writing some of these narratives. They don't expect everybody to have a 100% score on each and every item. Actually, if that occurred, they'd be raising eyebrows. So don't worry about trying to get a perfect score on everything. But let's see. I see we're coming up on 1 o'clock, and I will get here and, I guess, ask for final call on any questions. Again, we'll have this recording posted on the Virginia Fairs website under the library. And if that doesn't occur today, then perhaps tomorrow, and we'll be sure to send out the link and the slide deck later today, or tomorrow, as soon as we have everything posted. We'll be soon. We will share that with everyone. All right. If there are no other questions,
Tony,
yes, ma'am.
hey, are we still on for tomorrow?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, I will see you tomorrow at 10:30, I guess.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Take care.
Um,
Bye.
yeah, bye.
Bye.
Okay.
Thank you so much, Tony.
Oh, you're welcome. You're welcome. And if you get into it and you have any questions, just give us a holler. We'll see what we can do to help. And we appreciate everyone participating today, and hope you found this worth your time.
We did. Appreciate it. See you later.
Thank you, guys.